Добрий день.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We start our press conference. Each year, we survey the experts concerning the activity of the President. The assessment of the President is of interest, and this year we carried out the survey on the eve of the anniversary of the elections of Petro Poroshenko, and today we're going to share the results of our survey. I am Oleksii, and I give the floor to Iryna Bekeshkina, director of the Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiatives Foundation, and she will present the main results of this research and will share her opinion and interpretations concerning this topic. So, I won't say that something changed significantly compared with the previous years. During the years of presidency, Petro Poroshenko, if we are speaking about 10%, we have his assessment at the 0.5 out of 10. So this is satisfactory. A little bit better or a little bit worse. Last year we had 4.7 and average assessment is 5.3. So this is about the implementation of the visa-free regime. The majority of experts pointed out that this is the most positive thing that happened in the latest time of the presidency this year. So, overall assessment, they assess highly his foreign policy, and the assessment is low concerning domestic policy. Foreign policy 6.5, this is rather high, and closer to 3 is the implementation of the functions of the guarantee of the constitutions and regulation of the settlement of armed conflict in Donbass. Everything else is assessed lower, and the interaction with the government is also rather high. Interaction with the parliament is higher, 5. It is higher than the previous years. And lower estimate the realization of the staff policy and cooperation with the society, implementation of his promises. And if we are speaking about changes concerning last year, the positive changes, this is the regulation of armed conflict in Donbass. It can be connected with the adoption of the law on integration of Donbass by the parliament. If we are speaking about the main achievements, these are the introduction of the visa-free regime with EU, and it is highly assessed by the experts. Among other important achievements, experts believe that this is the reform of the armed forces and supply of lethal weapons from the US to Ukraine, and the initiative of the creation of Unity Church and continuation of sanctions and support of international coalition. So these are positive things concerning foreign policy, and there are improvements concerning the armed conflict in Donbass, and so there's a lack of progress with fighting against corruption and blocking of creation of specialized anti-corruption court. Also, failures are slow reforms and inefficient of some reforms such as medical, tax and pension reforms, and also requirement on e-declarations of anti-corruption activists and NGOs. Also, we asked for advice. What would experts advise what the president should do in the last year of his presidency? In domestic policy, first, there should be initiation of the electoral reform, fighting corruption, completion of judiciary reform, and promotion of anti-corruption court. And in foreign policy, there should be better cooperation with the EU and more full implementation of association agreement with the EU, and among priorities in the sphere, they believe that there should be proper cooperation with NATO and the US. And all these issues were considered during our previous roundtables dedicated to anniversaries of the presidency of Poroshenko. And the last issue was how our experts assess the chances of the president to be re-elected for the new term. And this we see it from the ratings that the situation is not unanimous, and second term, no one said that they are sure that he will be re-elected. Also, 6 experts were sure that Petro Poroshenko won't be re-elected. So there were 2 main positions, and that Poroshenko won't be elected, but there are chances he will be elected, part of experts believe, and 1/3 believes that President Poroshenko will be elected, but there are some doubts. So here we see that the situation among experts, it is there is no clear situation. And now I give the floor to our colleague, and she is going to tell us about the sphere, the foreign policy that the experts named as the most successful for president. Thank you. So President Poroshenko, during his presidency, gets the highest scores, and this happens in the sphere of foreign policy, and these are his obligations according with the Constitution, and he is also a political figure, and he can present himself better in this area than in the area of domestic policy. If we are speaking about the assessment of the 4th year, out of 5 main achievements that were mentioned by the experts in the framework of the survey of democratic initiatives, 4 out of them are about foreign policy, but they also can have continuation in domestic policy. If we are speaking about concrete things, for example, the issue of improvement of compatibility, the improvement of the military sphere, this is the issue of domestic policy, but also it reflects success of the president in the issues of bilateral negotiations and foreign policy. Also, visa-free regime, this is the success in foreign policy, but at the same time, this is the result of the changes that relates to domestic policy, and we should state that visa-free regime was the result that it didn't allow to assess all positive aspects of this. And we believe that society in other surveys, maybe they will be able to say that this is success in several years when they see that it opens Schengen zone for Ukrainians, and about the achievements of foreign policy, this preservation of anti-Putin coalition. The main efforts here were in the sphere of foreign policy, but for the domestic policy. This success allowed to increase the and develop military sector, and also to deliver proper policy concerning occupied territories, and to a lesser extent concerning Crimea, about many important areas that are important for Ukraine. And if we assess the activity of the president in this year, we should take into account that we heard about visa-free regime in the media, but we have more important task concerning comprehensive implementation of the association agreement. And here the president doesn't have direct competence to influence on the government and the implementation of plans to implement this agreement, but at the same time this task should be a part of actions and cooperation of the president as the institution with other bodies of power and his rhetoric, because the fact of visa-free regime is a plus, but there are a lot of tasks that should be completed, and the media does not pay a lot of attention to these tasks. And the failures Ms. Bekeshkina mentioned concerning the problems with introduction of anti-corruption court, let's remind that this infrastructure and the change of it, this was the part of the implementation of the agreement, and at the same time we have obligations to adhere to all steps and all reforms that were done for the visa-free regime and after it was introduced, and there are mechanisms of control and of implementation, and success doesn't mean that we should forget about those tasks that remain after a visa-free regime. And about the preservation of international anti-Putin coalition. This is directly related with opportunities of the state to develop internal policy, domestic policy concerning Donbass. And Oleksii Vasilyevich will tell us about domestic policy later. And Poroshenko has the task not only to preserve existing coalition in the framework of the EU, because there are challenges that we cannot fully assess. New government in Italy, and there should be proper efforts by Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Poroshenko in order that Ukraine not to become the object of speculations in the European Council, because there can be speculations and challenges that we should work on, and this is the challenge for Ukraine to preserve the unity of the European Union concerning the policy towards Russia because of the events in Crimea and Donbass. And about other area that was active in the fourth year in Rhetoric and in the plans of Poroshenko as a president. This is cooperation of Ukraine with NATO. To a lesser degree, it brings attention at the tactical level, in the daily work, the issues of visa-free regime. They are highlighted, but the cooperation with NATO, this is the effort of officials and the president, and now this cooperation is at a proper level. The realization of defense bulletin and midterm planning and plan the events to reform defense sector for 3 or 5 years, and this was request from NATO, and sustainability in the implementation of this strategy and this cooperation now has been started, and information efforts of the state, though they are implemented by the government, but we are speaking about the spread of information about NATO. It was done last year, and this trend will continue for several years to come. And the president, he should take into account several risks concerning NATO, the issue of referendum, that this idea was present during the last several years. Maybe this is this may be the part of new rhetorics during elections, but these issues, they should serve not only the results of candidates, but also we should preserve the unity of the society, despite the high assessment of the probability that Ukrainians will vote for joining NATO. The assessment is about 70%, but still we have a high level of those people who are not ready in the east and southern regions, and they would be ready to vote against. And if there is such a referendum, we should understand that the idea that is now maybe grounded, that we have high support and presidential support, maybe the positive result is not guaranteed. That's why I believe that we should be cautious about this rhetoric about joining NATO if we're speaking about our president and the people in power. Now I give thank you. Now I give the floor to Mykhailo Zhernakov. He is the DEJURE Foundation Director, and he's going to tell us about judiciary and anti-corruption efforts. Please. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you. We thank the Fund of Democratic Initiatives and those who came here today. We have an interesting survey. Why the present? Why the judiciary reform? From the times of the Revolution of Dignity, the president initiated all the laws that provide changes to judiciary reforms, and the laws were adopted in 2016. The laws that envisage independent court, but the experts mentioned the failure of judiciary reform. This is the failure of court reform is the failure of Poroshenko. So we cannot name court reform as a success. And I was stopped by police while I was on the route here, and I was fined, and I'm ready to pay this fine because I really violated the rule, and I turned in a place where it is forbidden to make a turn, and I was provided with the document that says that I should pay a fine. So if you violated something, you should pay a fine. So if you violate something, you should be fined, and you should pay this fine. It is bad to violate law, and I'm glad that if person is a perpetrator, he violates something, so he should be punished. And top corruption and top crimes, they are not punished. And we have patrol police reform that succeeded, anti-corruption bureau and specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office. Everything else with what we've tried to fight and what we've tried to build, independent courts, all anti-corruption court, prosecutor's office, and the rest of police beyond different other institutions, they remain unreformed. There were different leaders of reforms in the judiciary and in the courts. Poroshenko is the most important person concerning reforms because other laws were not adopted. Everything that was submitted by Poroshenko was accepted, or today they may vote on the law on anti-corruption court. God forbid they vote for the first reading version of the court, otherwise this effort will fail. Let's look at figures. What happened, if we are not speaking about legal provisions, but there were changes to constitution, and we as a civil society invested a lot of efforts, and the president also contributed. This is not sarcasm, and the constitutional changes were adopted, and they were beneficial to the president, and there were some progressive things, and there are also provisions that the judges elect the judges, those judges whom we try to replace in the course of the reform. So the Supreme Court has 80% of all judges, 76 do not correspond to the criteria of the integrity, but this is the main criteria. It was established, and we do not know how to verify it. We know why, but in what way, we cannot understand. And the rest of the judges, the clearance of judiciary, of courts, and reattestation of all the judges, it is questionable because only less than 5% are recommended to be fired. We do not know the situation. And the judges of Maidan, only 14% were fired, and everyone else, they remained on their positions, those who took legal decisions. And if we're speaking about anti-corruption court, they do not want to provide the veto right to international experts to veto those candidates who are not integral. So this battle is failed by the anti-corruption activists. They didn't succeed in this. There are slim chances. And there is no such an option as victory concerning anti-corruption court, but we will live and see what will happen in reality. So my opinion is this, that President Poroshenko has slim chances for being re-elected, and one of the reasons why it is happening because they promised, but they didn't deliver the supremacy of law and fighting with corruption and fair law enforcement bodies. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to add a few words. We are expecting to get the results of the national survey, and there will be also ratings of confidence and non-confidence in the top leadership. The experts see more than average citizens, ordinary citizens, so their scores are higher than than the scores given by ordinary people. When we will see the results, when we will publish them in 1 week, we shall publish some part of them. And now, talking about what has not been said, I was surprised the main achievements do not mention the achievements of decommunizations, historical monuments, but everyone has forgotten about this. Even me has forgotten about this as an expert, as well as Miss Iryna. However, we really has achievements in this domain. This, I think, President Poroshenko will be using in his presidential election campaign. He will try to use these achievements. As concerns the reform of judiciary, the experts' opinions differed. 8 experts said that Poroshenko has achievements, and the majority of experts said that it was a failure. So the reforms have started and something has been done, but this is not what was expected by the experts and the society. The society should see the results, and the society does not see these results. That is why it is not surprising that communication with the society was estimated as unsatisfactory. On the eve of elections, there are domains, there are results which we can use. Doing business rating has improved, but people the citizens, they do not trust in top leadership. Visa-free regime and the association agreement, they happened last year, so this was the facts which contributed to high ratings of the president, but I think that on the eve of the elections, these topics could be a little bit abandoned. The visa-free regime was received 2 years ago, so the problem is in that whether the Poroshenko will be capable to use these topics in a good way. On the eve of the meeting with Trump, there are some there are some objections on the part of Trump, but there is a scandal which reminded me the policy that everything is spoiled. Let's remind the facts. When Trump will not give us lethal weaponry, then whether we will have the meeting with Trump, also there were many supporters of betrayer who said that there would not be any meeting with Trump and that the meeting was too short, we will not get weaponry. But now we see that we have the system which has already been built. They gave us javelins. So the system of relationship with the administration of Trump has been built. Although there were so many skeptic remarks, so one of the issues towards the leadership of Ukraine. Ukraine is has decided to buy the U.S. coal and the U.S. electric diesel railway cars. trains. So they say that it's kind of economic bribe from Poroshenko to Trump to get some dividends, and I remind that this brainstormings which the think tank and NGOs on political issues conducted, all of them said that we should get America, the USA, by economic reasons. If we just will be saying them that it is important to help Ukraine, this would not work. And now we see that Trump is interested in terms of economy in cooperation with Ukraine, and again this is positioned as a minus to the leadership of Ukraine. So here is the trend that everything has been spoiled. Then Minsk agreements. What is important here? On the one hand, we have not yielded our positions. We have not implemented the political part of the Minsk Accords because it is not profitable for us. So now we see that Ukrainian army has improved, and we have not surrendered on our stance. This discussion, when we discuss what to do with Donbass, we always hear on TV that the army waits for the signal to move forward and to free, to liberate Donbass. Ukrainian army has liberated Pivdenne village, which is in the gray zone. So Ukrainian army moved forward, and now you see what is the result. Not only this, we have intensified hostilities now. This illustrates the following thing. Yes, we cannot consider military solution of the conflict. In our TV programs and talk shows, the other line was dominating, and it remains to spoil the ratings of the president, and I think this topic will be again discussed and promoted, that nothing has changed, that the Ukrainian army suffers losses as well as civilians. And the president will be saying that we have stabilized the situation, that the negotiations on introduction of peacekeepers in Ukraine has started. So where the main problems for example, of formation of Central Electoral Commission membership, electronic declarations, and corruptioners. The Central Electoral Commission, 13 candidates, this is a mistake to give one place to an oppositional bloc. We see here there are mistakes which hurt the ratings, which deteriorate the ratings as concerns corruption. The logic could be quite vice versa, but for the experts this is very demonstrative fact. I think that the largest weakness is that the president failed to establish a party of influence. In 2013-2014 there was an opportunity, but now we have the party of power, no oppositional party. So this discussion there now more deteriorate the ratings of the president as concerns the chances for re-election of the president. Majority of experts say that there are chances, but he would not be re-elected. This could be compared with the results of survey. We do not remember what sociological company conducted the survey. TMIS was a company, and Tymoshenko had the best ratings, but most of people responded that Poroshenko will be the president. So to be re-elected, it is hard, but there are some chances that Poroshenko will be re-elected. So here the situation will be connected with who would be the alternative. I see that the Poroshenko's bloc will have more problems in the parliamentary elections because the people would be voting for Democratic Alliance public platform, Bekeshkina. The choice is wider, and where they will be chosen between two candidatures, Poroshenko could win. The opposition between Poroshenko and Tymoshenko could happen, but not with Grisenko, I think, because historical facts, when Grisenko says that Reagan, Thatcher, Lee Kuan Yew are authoritarian leaders. In his opinion, we are now working at the same chair in the university, but if he is my student, I would not pass him at the exam. When we will have an updated ratings, we will conduct another press briefing. Now we have among our audience one interesting person. I proposed this person to take the floor. We have Ms. Paul Danieri. He is one of the pillars of Western Ukrainian studies. When we say Andrew Wilson, Alexander Motel, Taras Kuzin, Paul Danieri is one of the pillars of the Western Ukrainian studies. If he wants to say us something,
you'll translate? Or you all understand? Клас.
Але треба навушники дати.
Do people need headphones?
Можу перекладати.
От, я ще набився на те, щоб перекладати. Окей.
Okay. I will speak slowly. I could either speak about how I think Poroshenko is viewed in the United States, or about how we in the United States are attempting to assess the forthcoming election.
Both.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, my back is to you. So first, how Poroshenko is assessed in the United States. as here there is a wide range of attitudes. Obviously, 99.9% of Americans have no idea who he is. But I'm talking about people who study Ukraine or people who are connected with government and think tanks on Ukraine. So at one end of the spectrum, I would say, are the people who would simply say he's another oligarch who's taken over Ukraine. And maybe he's a better oligarch than the last oligarch, but an oligarch is an oligarch. So that's one view. And there they would focus on the absence of getting the anti-corruption court up and running, on the fact that he didn't sell all these businesses he said he was going to sell, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the fear of that end of the spectrum is that Poroshenko, as some of his predecessors, to be honest, will always do just enough to try to get the next tranche of the loan from the IMF, or just enough to keep the United States on side, as we might say, but will never really do the things to get the country in a strong position. So that's one perspective. The opposite perspective is he's the president. Ukraine is a democracy. It has a parliament. It has a society. It has courts. They have to do their parts. And the parliament in particular, many people would say, is not doing its part. So I think there are a lot of people who put blame for what is not happening, not as much on Poroshenko himself as on the parliament and the other people he has to contend with. So there is a range of opinion on Poroshenko himself. To transition that into looking to the future, I think a lot of people, whether they are positive about Poroshenko or negative about Poroshenko in the United States, ask the question, well, what is the alternative? And this gets us to this question of next year's elections. We all, those of us who study this, we all read this poll from KMIS last week or 2 weeks ago that showed if it's the second round and it's this person against this person. And we see, I think, the same things, which is it doesn't look good for him. But it's a long way to the election, right? Most people say they are undecided, and a lot can happen between now and then. But I think a lot of people in the United States who look at all of the other candidates feel like most of them we don't know a lot about. Zelensky, who is Zelensky, right? And we ask our friends in Ukraine, who is Zelensky? And they send us to YouTube to watch this show. What is it called? Sluga Prezidenta. And we, okay, this is Zelensky. So I happen to know who Slava Varkachuk is, but a lot of people don't. What are his politics? What are his policy? Hrytsenko, we know. But nobody really knows any of these characters, really, other than they think they know Tymoshenko. But everybody asks, well, what would this be? We have no idea. Is she still an oligarch, or is she changed? So as in Ukraine, and I've been in Kyiv for about 2 weeks now, and everybody says the same thing, which is, we don't know what's going to happen. We in the United States don't know what's going to happen either. I think the worry in the United States, or the fear in the United States, is either that the election itself leads to some kind of chaos, which could be exploited by external powers, or that someone will be elected who is more of a populist kind of leader, who will not make the kind of changes needed to move the country forward. And I'll just close by saying, I think if there's anything people in the United States agree on who watch Ukraine, it's that some fairly dramatic reforms need to be made if the country is to move forward. And that's the question we ask about all these leaders. So I'm sorry, that was too long.
No, that's fine.
And I'm happy to answer questions if you want.
Дуже дякуємо, Пол. І я
Thank you very much, Paul. It was not planned interview. I invited Mr. Paul here, but I decided it was my decision to ask him for his opinion. We have 11 minutes left for our discussions. I would like to use my chance to ask you a question. In your opinion, what event which could be theoretically forecast, maybe some international meeting, maybe some economic events, maybe something else, what can change dramatically the opinions of Ukrainians towards Poroshenko, what could play a decisive role in his ratings, in those framework which we can predict. I will start. What are the peculiarities of today's ratings? We used to have two leaders, and Ukraine was divided into two parts. One leader was oriented to integration with Europe, and the other leader who was focused on Russian vector. Now, it is fair for some candidates to say, such as Boyko, Rabinovich, Gritsenko, Sadavoy. This is not very clear, but as concerns Tymoshenko and Poroshenko, they have almost the same positions as to quality. They are supported. Tymoshenko is supported in the controlled part of Donbass, and Poroshenko is. The difference is between their financial standings.
So among people who live rather comfortably, 20% are for Poroshenko and 1% is for Tymoshenko. What can we say about it? This will depend on the economic situation in the country. If it will be stable, if there's growth, Poroshenko will have a chance, and if there's no growth, no chance for Poroshenko. And the current situation is important. IMF insists that anti-corruption court should correspond to the national obligations of Ukraine, and Venice Commission decisions, and the tranche depends on this. And otherwise there won't be a tranche, and there will be inflation and negative economic consequences. And my personal view, and it is shared by many, it is evident that it is decided now. Why it's such a struggle? Why won't they make it in correspondence with the Venice Commission requirement and IMF requirement and international community requirement? Why they don't want to adopt this law? Because in such a case, no one can guarantee that they will be brought to this court themselves. That's why there is such a struggle. I wanted to agree with Iryna Erikovna. One comment from me. I would like to add that this is a phenomenon, the assessment of the candidates for presidency, not only in the next cycle, but in principle, the population, according to the internal indicators, they assess the candidate, and at the same time, when there are domestic troubles, no one wants to be responsible inside the country, so they only want to take successes, not failures. And then one of the addresses of the president, he said that he initiated decentralization, but he said that this is the success of domestic policy, and there is the intent to demonstrate the involvement in those reforms that are not in direct competence of the president and the Ukrainian society. We do not have such a phenomenon like in Russia, when foreign topics influence society in such a way that people would sacrifice inside the country, and this shows the negative development in the society and in the country. And no matter what successes of the president or the government on the international arena, unfortunately, Ukrainians, they are not motivated by this. They won't bring this person to the top of electoral process. So I believe that domestic matters will be more important for us during the election campaign. And this is maybe the problem of the president, who is more successful in foreign policy issues. I agree with you. I think Poroshenko maybe will act like candidates from power usually act. He would say, I'm not perfect and something went wrong, but you can forecast my actions, I provide some sort of stability, and if someone else comes, what happens then? So maybe this aspect is important. Another aspect is there will be a focus on patriotic rhetoric. There will be several components, including, for example, I can add here the provision of independence to Ukrainian church, and this is not about economy, but they can play on this, and maybe there will be some international events, for example. For example, we will see what will happen with the South Stream, whether this transit through Ukraine will remain, and the prospects of the implementation of the actions plan concerning membership. So if there are no other questions, we thank you. Thank you for your research. Till the next time, goodbye.